Hey there. So I just wanted to give everybody a sense of what we tested um, for the MR inline alerts in user testing before I go into what the insights were. So there were 4 tasks and then a couple of follow-up questions. So just to keep this shorter, I'll just go through the tasks. So for the first one, and I tried to preview this in user testing, but it doesn't seem like I can do it after the test was launched. So I'm just reading from Figma. So task 1, participants received this prompt. Let's say you got pinged on an MR merge request as a code reviewer and want to make sure that none of the code will introduce any security vulnerabilities. Looking at this screen and without clicking on anything, how many vulnerability findings were detected? Proceed to the next task when you have an answer. So for that, they looked at this screen. I have the panel out here, but this was, it fit on the screen. And I could just observe them kind of looking around. And most people were able to find this. Some struggled, but the correct answer is this icon right here, that when you hover over it, it says 2 security findings and 1 code quality finding. Some people got confused with unresolved threads up here, and so they said 11. But I'm not too worried about that because when I did internal solution validation testing with GitLab team members, they are so used to looking at this page. We all are. And so they definitely noticed that this was different here. Whereas somebody that's brand new to GitLab and merge requests may not see it immediately, but I think once they start interacting with it, you know, we don't need to call too much attention to it because it may not be what their primary job to be done. It could be secondary or even tertiary. So I'm not worried about the discoverability of this. It seems to be convenient that it's kind of out of the way and only comes into play when needed. So that was task 1. And then task 2 was proceed to click on the red stop sign icon next to line 18. Review the icon in the first vulnerability and decide this is a false positive and don't want it to show up again in this project. Please do so now. And then I just said, no, click on comment box to add a comment automatically. We could pretend you wrote it. So just a little prototype thing there. So for task 2, they come here, click, and then open the first vulnerability, look at this information. And because the task, you know, intentionally left it kind of open-ended, it says, decide this is a false positive and you don't want it to show up again in this project. So we got a lot of mixed reactions to that. Some people said that they would want to create an issue. You can't click on that. Some people said that they would want to add a comment. Other people said that they would dismiss, which was the path that I was aiming for in order to test what happens next. So a little bit mixed here. I think this would largely come down to what organizations want their process to be in the case of a true positive, in the case of a false positive. And I think our goal here should be to allow the flexibility for each organization to determine what is the right path for them. So we will then click on dismiss. And then I wanted to test the difference in people's minds. What was the difference between ignore for this MR and dismiss for this project? I said in the scenario that you want to dismiss for the project, and then the reason is false positive, they'd add a comment and then dismiss. So that went really well. And then they like that they can see a badge confirming that it was dismissed. However, I then in the next prompt asked people, what do you think the difference is between these two, ignore for this MR and dismiss for the project? And pretty much every participant, which was about 14 all in all, said that dismissed for this project would mean that the vulnerability would not show up again in this MR or a different MR, which isn't correct. Unless they set a policy saying ignore this on this file or to this branch, or just ignore this type, etc., it would absolutely show up again. So that was a little bit concerning. I also had this tooltip over here. Nobody interacted with that. It's kind of hard to say what people would do normally with or without the prototype, because they are so used to a lot of things not being interactive. So I think there's one of two ways forward here. One, maybe we take this explanation out of the tooltip. I think the explanation could be written a little bit better as well. But we either make it very clear what each of these things are, or we can consider adding dismiss for only security approvers, or if the user wants to set a policy of a security group, maybe they don't have to be security approvers like with a security title per se, but certain people that can dismiss, otherwise it's just ignore. So these are some ideas that I'm playing around with. But as part of this, something I realized that is that if you click on this again, it would say that it was dismissed, but we don't currently have a way of undismissing or changing to confirmed. Let's say that I dismissed, but then a security engineer comes along and says, no, this shouldn't have been dismissed. This is a true positive. It needs to be fixed. We don't currently have a way in here to change the status. So that's something I'm also trying to address in my upcoming iterations. So a lot to think on there. For task 3, the prompt was look at the details of the second vulnerability and decide that this is a true positive. So the last one was a false positive. Now click on the second one, decide this is a true positive. You want a second pair of eyes on this before proceeding. How would you expect to do that? So they would then interact with the prototype, click on the second vulnerability. And in the case of a true positive, about half of the participants said that they would create an issue. And also on that note, I think the user should be able to create an issue and then also put this into a confirmed state rather than just leaving it in a needs triage state, because if the MR author sees that it is a confirmed vulnerability, they are much less likely to merge that MR, seeing that it's been confirmed by someone else. So going back to needing to change the status, which I'll be showing some explorations for in my next walkthrough video. So half of the participants said that they would create an issue, and half said that they would add a comment. Again, pretty much all of these, I think, except for one or maybe two, said that they weren't very familiar with GitLab. So I think for people that are familiar with it, they're going to know what to expect when clicking add a comment in this context. So not worried if people want to take either path here, create an issue and add a comment, there should be that flexibility there. But I did see people click on add a comment and then click here. And there was a little bit of ambiguity as to whether or not they should click start a review or add comment now. They, again, not very familiar with GitLab, don't know the difference between these two. Most people that got to this step said that they would try to click start a review. It's not prototyped here, but I saw a lot of people try to click there, assuming that start a review means that something magical happens on the back end, or the project's been configured in such a way that then a reviewer would review the vulnerability, which is not what actually happens. So I think we're not setting proper expectations there either. So that start a review could be a little bit dangerous in a sense, where it's setting false expectations that somebody, whether it's on their team or within GitLab, is going to review the vulnerability. So I need to think more on that as well, and setting the right expectations there, because that is not what happens. However, some people said click add comment now, and they thought this was great and intuitive that you could write a comment inline. And then the last task was, you have one dismissed vulnerability visible. How would you view only the ones that still need your attention? So a couple of people said, well, I would just look for the badges and didn't even really try. I think like 2 people said that. A couple more tried to click on this menu here with the 3 dots, which I don't have prototyped and isn't the correct answer. I saw people looking all over the place, and some just gave up. And some people did, I think something's wrong with the prototype here. Let me see. It should be okay. Well, what happens here in the prototype, this worked correctly. Oh, here we go. It's this one. So people would look around, they weren't able to find it. Everybody who, I think like 3 participants out of 14 thought to go straight to this cogwheel. But a large majority of the participants struggled to find this. So what we've done here is to put the security severities, you can filter by those. The security statuses can be filtered by. Again, if you can't change a status or set back to needs triage, set to confirmed or resolved, then it's kind of pointless to have these here. So I feel even more confident that we are going to need to introduce status changes, and we can scope it to security approvers or anyone who's just not the MR author. And then I separated out code quality severities. Now, code quality doesn't have statuses attached to them, so we don't have to worry about that. But when I did internal solution validation testing, what I heard again and again from these software developers, who is the primary persona here, was that security is always going to take precedence over code quality. And if there are a lot of findings, they want to be able to turn off code quality, just focus on security, and then turn on code quality ones, or maybe just see critical of each. But it seems like there was a strong preference to have them separated out. So if we do want to save some space, I think for an MVC, we can combine these, the severities. We would need to align the names of the severities, because right now, as it stands in production, code quality severities are different. I changed them here just to avoid getting very obvious feedback if they should be aligned. But the code quality severities right now start with blocker, and then critical is actually second most important. And then I think it's major, minor, and info. So we could align these and then just say show all security and code quality in one, or we could separate them out. But again, from what I heard from internal solution validation testing with developers, it's better if we can separate them. So again, a lot of struggling with finding this filter. So that's something I'm also going to be looking at a little bit more closely in a future iteration. One idea by Michael was to put an alert in this section here when uncollapsed, which I really like. But if there's not more than one vulnerability on one line, the thinking is that you would just click directly on the vulnerability icon or the severity icon, and it would open up the modal directly rather than uncollapsing this. So this would only be the state where it uncollapses if there's more than one on a line, which will be an edge case. I think the most of the time there will just be one finding on a line. So that won't always work. Something else that we can consider is putting it in the overview tab. When this is uncollapsed, we could introduce it here. And finally, I was thinking one other possibility could be to have this as kind of an overlay when, as soon as you get to the page, with a popover kind of calling it out, just saying, hey, if you want to, like, we have this new feature, if you want to hide them at any point, here's where the filter is. I've also talked with Jeremy and mentioned this to him on the foundations team about we might need to update this icon from the cogwheel, which feels more like settings. And one participant even said maybe it's in the settings menu, to something more that looks like a filter. It's just a little bit tricky because these top findings aren't really a filter. It is more like settings or viewing preferences. So I'm not sure if there's a really perfect icon that can encompass all of those things. But those were the major findings. Overall, got some really, really, really great encouragement that this feature would absolutely be useful. I asked participants on a scale of 1 to 7, how useful would this be for you and or your team? And the average was was over 6 out of 7. So that's really encouraging. And some participants were very excited. They said that they currently have security tooling that is separate from their everyday workflow. And so to get all of these things combined into one product would be hugely beneficial for them. So I think we just have some small tweaks to work out, and then, but we're on a really great value adding feature here. So my next steps are to finish doing some explorations, share with the team, and maybe run solution validation testing again to see if we can reduce some of that confusion and some of those errors. So let me know if you have any feedback, any questions, any thoughts, and thanks for watching.